Previously on Popping Collars.
And then, of course, like the whole Disney industry, like the Mickey Minnie stuff, they're so aware at such an early age, my girls anyway, of who these characters are and kind of what they represent and what the differences are between them. And it's amazing to me how quickly that indoctrination happens and how widespread it is. How it reaches so many children.
Isn't that because you live in Florida?
Okay, the Disney thing, maybe.
You do day trips to Disney World, for God's sake. You are a full participant.
Don't shame me and my Disney participation.
Betsy, he goes for himself.
I'm with you. Yeah, he does.
Look, when I say I work at a church, what I mean is the Church of the Mouse. Welcome to Popping Collars, the podcast that lives at the intersection between religion and pop culture. I'm your host. My name is Greg Knight. I am in Palm Beach, Florida. With me are my co-hosts, Betsy Gonzalez from Alexandria, Virginia. Hello, Betsy.
Hey, Greg.
Liz Easton from Omaha, Nebraska. Hello, Liz.
Hey, Greg.
And a very special guest this time, someone with their very own IMDb page, for God's sake. It's Stephen Cohn from Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're going to be really impressed with this, Stephen. This is episode 41 of the 1,195th ranked podcast in the iTunes spirituality category.
Congrats.
And our topic today is Stephen's film, Henry Gamble's Birthday Party. So speaking of IMDb, you want to hear a synopsis of your film? From
yes.
the website. Taking place over the course of 24 hours, the film follows preacher's kid, Henry Gamble, as he treads through various sexual possibilities, seeking to come into his own, as the adults and teenagers at his pool party struggle to navigate their public and private longing for love. I've got a question to start with. Why a story about youth? What's attractive for you as a storyteller about setting this story of discovery in the world of teenagers?
I don't know. It's one of those things, you make what you make, and you sort of discover what you're interested in. But I didn't have a vested interest in coming-of-age stories growing up, necessarily. I mean, I had a deep, profound interest in movies, period, but I was never seeking out, necessarily, first and foremost, the coming-of-age films, and then around the time of The Wise Kids, which was a movie I made a few years ago, it was just sort of, I guess, as they say in the church, on my heart. I was thinking about the conflicts between non-believers and believers, and all the first encounters with people from different points of view when you're in a conservative environment at that age, and was interested in tackling that. But I guess it's worth mentioning that it's always attached to an interest also in the generational counterparts and in the slightly different experience of older generations. So it's never for me a pure interest in the teenagers. It's sort of a compare-contrast sort of thing. So now I love them, but sometimes you just, how you buy a plant and realize you're into basil or whatever. I mean, or I don't know, it's the worst analogy ever. But sometimes you don't know that you're going to love doing something until you do it. So as a young aspiring filmmaker, I wouldn't necessarily said that I wanted to tell these stories, but I guess there's something about my experience as a teenager in the church that has haunted me and that I've needed to get out of my system.
Huh. So is it part autobiographical?
Yeah, I would say they're sort of emotionally autobiographical and semi.
I was going to say, what I like about the generational spread is it's the same sort of stuff that I talk about working with young people, is that, it bursts their bubble a little bit, that there's this age you're going to get to, and you get to have it all figured out, and everything's going to be great, and, and you're going to know everything, and my 8-year-old does that with me, but you're an adult, you're supposed to know everything. Right. And I like the modeling that we can be messes. We're just messes. And that we're trying and we're seeking and we're searching, and that's happening at all of our ages. And it isn't just something that is housed in the teen experience, and that it's, the mom is having her own, who am I becoming? Those, I loved connecting kind of all levels inside. Because I saw myself as a young person, and I saw myself as the adult, and I saw, I like that multi-generational experience.
Oh, good. you get to a point when you're an adult where you're like, oh, wow, there's probably a lot going on with these people. But yeah, my dad is digitizing the VHS family movies from my past, and recently watched like a 20-minute home movie of me. I'm filming it, so I'm not really in it, except for the one time I go into the bathroom to film myself in the mirror. But it's a lot of people in that video that inspired characters like I'm tackling now, and they're having a good time. I mean, we're having a great time. It's not like it's not super tense, but. Later you kind of look back and, I wonder what that couple was going through. I wonder my mom and dad are clearly in a different mental state than they are now. I think they're a little more content with their lives now. But looking in that, you have to look very closely to sort of see, oh, wow, even, there's a cookout happening here, a birthday party happening here. But you notice the nuances underneath that you didn't really necessarily notice then.
Something that resonated with me was that, obviously there has to be drama involved, right? So you have like all these different stories that are going on throughout the party. You have Ricky's story, you have Leo's story, you have what's going on with Henry, what's going on with his parents, what's going on with his sister. It kind of divides your attention through all of these things. And I think what I took away is that when you do sort of discover those old pictures, looking back and stuff like that, it makes you realize that, oh man, like when I was in the moment, I didn't necessarily see all of these things playing out, but everybody had something that they were kind of working through. Like, I mean, I think that that's what I love about working with youth is that it seems like they're fully formed people, but they're not who they're ultimately going to be.
Right.
They're still in formation. They're still figuring it out. They're still trying things. They're still discovering things. They're still figuring out how they relate to each other. And it feels like they're whole, and yet there's something that's missing that's going to eventually lead them to who they are. And I sort of felt like, I felt that as I was watching the movie. I was like, it made me remember those kids that I grew up with and think, I knew them when they were kids, but I didn't really know who they ultimately were going to be.
Yeah, I guess I sort of am kind of retroactively obsessed with the transformation that happened. But it's all entirely about transformations. Like, you're literally becoming, and she says in the movie, you're becoming yourself. I don't know. It's like therapy for me. I don't know. You don't know your hang-ups. I don't even know my hang-ups until I'm like, I keep making these movies.
We're all working on something.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a reason that I've now raised a ton of money and made 2 features about teenagers trying to figure out how to find their independence and think for themselves and reconcile their spiritual selves with their physical bodies. I don't know.
I thought it was so interesting with the generational piece that everyone was struggling with something, among really, I guess you sort of had 3 generations represented there, kind of like older adults and then the parent of the teenagers and then the teenagers themselves. But they were all of the issues that they were dealing with, at least on that day, had to do with sex and sexuality. And that was such an eye-opener and something that, it was at once tragic that these are generations of people who have experienced a ton of shame about sex, which was not the religious environment or cultural environment that I grew up in, but you could just see that was really tragic. But sort of the side of that could leave a lot of room for kind of a beautiful transformation was this idea that our sexuality is something that we confront and experience and enjoy and fear and all of it for our whole lives. Like you never outgrow that. In this case, it happened to be very sad, I think,
right.
that these folks were feeling shame, but it was also sort of this beautiful expression of like, this is part of the, such an enormous part of the human experience that transcends generations completely.
Yeah, and that maybe there's a way to integrate your body and your soul, right? I mean, that's sort of the idea. Yeah, no, I mean, Episcopals and Methodists have always been much better at liking their own bodies, I think.
Oh,
yeah, Methodist Church was the first place that I did Pictionary. That was one of the places my mom would send me to places to go do some of the sex talk, right? So it's Episcopal stuff. But I remember the Methodist one. It was boys and girls together. I remember I had to draw fallopian tubes in the Pictionary. So there's a lot of kind of that desensitization. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out there. No shame. This is just what it is, and spirituality of sexuality and that kind of idea.
Yeah.
See, my experience as an Episcopalian is that we as individual people tend to be maybe more sex positive or more progressive when it comes to sexuality, but we don't necessarily have religious language for it. I don't think that we have a great, ability to talk about. I mean, I don't know, Greg, in your youth group, do you talk about sex?
There's an education piece of figuring out for a lot of kids who only understand binary ideas of sexuality.
In the world that I came from, even now, they wouldn't even be taken seriously. Not even close to being taken seriously. They would be laughed at or admonished, and that's why I made Henry Gamble. I felt like not having any indictment or criticism at all in that movie was a little, I don't know, maybe unfair to a lot of the people and adolescents who are being emotionally damaged by this hypocrisy. So I think there's some people who find Henry Gamble a little hard-hitting or borderline satirical or parodic or caricatures in some places, but it's a deliberate choice to call. This movie is deliberately trying to call them out for a lot of the grief that world is causing. So still a very harmful environment for people who are questioning, and it needs to be called out, but in a human way. Otherwise, people won't engage with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I like, is that there isn't this big easy answer, this big reveal, and he's gay, and everyone at the party knows it, and and then suddenly everyone sees how, I've been so wrong. You don't go simple, right? It stays, some things stay tight, and they're not all known by everybody, and I think that's more real to some of the experience.
The thing that I really appreciate about Henry Gamble is that the youth leaders, the adults in this movie, looked a lot like the youth leaders that I grew up with. And it's only sort of in watching this movie that I started to think about, wait a second, who are these people? Liz touched on the sadness of a lot of the adults. And I think that that's true, because there's something about watching young people and seeing kind of how they're in formation and their life is ahead of them. And you're kind of like the person who's partnered, married, has kids, whatever. Your life has happened. And if you're not happy with it, you can see how nostalgia would catch you up. And this would be an appealing thing to want to do, to hang out with young people and kind of live vicariously.
Yeah.
And there seemed to be some of that a little bit from some of the adult characters.
But what was interesting to me was that as youth group leaders, they seemed to be really, along with the kids, kind of obsessed with sex and sexual purity. And then their sexuality, just by virtue of their marriage, the fact that they were married to one another was sort of flaunted. Everywhere she went, people were like, she's pregnant. Did you know that she's pregnant? It was this celebration of their sexuality. They were really handsy in the pool.
Yeah.
I just thought that was really interesting that here are young, good-looking people who are allowed to be sexual. You other young, good-looking people, you have to repress your sexuality.
Yeah. Well, I think all of that's on purpose, and it's because I think those kinds of people can do the most damage, because that's who the kids are looking up to. They seem totally happy. They make sex seem okay. And so the homophobia and closed-mindedness is veiled behind a kind of picture-perfect postcard lifestyle, and it's something that you do see in early to mid to late 20-something newly married couples. They're really excited to be young and married. It's the best. It makes them so happy, especially in the evangelical church and the Baptist church too, especially. It's their goal. So if they find someone they love and can have sex with constantly in their early 20s, that's going to keep them going until they're early 30s. And then
25.
And then they turn into more outwardly complicated people. But, it's a very particular type of person. I as a reference, I tried to send references that weren't condescending to the actors. So I didn't send him any, like, tacky megachurch stuff. I was trying to find just, like, real people that anybody would want to hang out with. But I sent that couple... Did y'all see God Loves Uganda?
Mm-mm.
No.
Oh, it's a documentary. It's a documentary about the Kill the Gay campaign in Uganda and how the American Evangelical Church is actually supporting it.
Yes.
Anyway, there's a really fun-loving mid-20s, just really super attractive, super in love with each other couple down there in Uganda, like doing the Lord's work, supporting the persecution of gay people. And if you didn't know that, you'd want to hang out with them. They just seem so happy. Yeah. So I sent that to Kelly and Travis and was like, y'all just be cool.
Wow.
Yeah, no, Greg, your statement about working with young people. Steve and I live on a dorm with 50 sophomore, junior, and senior girls.
Amazing.
So, yes. So I don't say that to toot my own horn. I say that to say I am immersed in teen culture in a way here that I just never have been as a youth leader.
Yep.
You know, we're very much, as a boarding school, this kind of in loco parentis. You know, their parents are not here. Their parents are active members of their lives and all that kind of stuff. But if you need that face-to-face conversation, you're coming to find an adult in this community. And I find it interesting the way, what sorts of adults are really drawn to these even more intense kind of working with young people than a day school even, that there's really an all-in that you're asked for here, and really knowing that you are part of the formation of these kids and that they are watching you.
Yeah.
And watching your families in the community. They're watching your relationship. They're watching how you mother your child. They're watching all of it. And that there's just seed planting all over the place.
Yeah, and sometimes they're not even aware of watching. They're absorbing. No. And they realize it later that they were watching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So can we talk about a little bit about the fact that you talk about religion and spirituality in your movie, like overtly? So here's the thing. So there's a bunch of, like, spirituality movies that are on the market. So, like, I'm thinking of, like, Pure Flix kind of productions, you know, like God's Not Dead and stuff like that, that do this thing where they overtly talk about, like, religion, spirituality, all of that stuff. And then we talk about this on our podcast all the time, this kind of idea of, like, you know, separating people and dividing people. But it does. Like, there is like this political part of that. Like, that is a conservative kind of media that's promoting a very specific agenda. And you don't necessarily see anything like that in sort of a thoughtful piece. Like, religion, spirituality, if it's a part of somebody's world, it's something nice. You know, it's not something like you wouldn't necessarily say, like, Jesus. You would say, like, I feel good about my life. Or, you know, it would be very eat, pray, lovey kind of approach to religion, where it's just kind of like this thing that like we can absorb.
Mysticism and spirituality.
Yeah. But you just get really specific with the language. And I think that kind of jarred me at first when I was watching this. I was like, wait a second, is this like a spiritual film? Like, what's going on here? But they're talking about sexuality, and that's not something that happens. Like, do you think about that? Do you think that you're in this kind of world that is dominated by, like, the sort of conservative Christian thing, and you're, like, a very different voice in the middle of this? Is that intentional on your part?
I don't know. You know, I don't know. I don't think much about it. I just, and it's where I came from. It's what I'm making movies about. I don't think about its place in the culture really, except I'm such a cinephile and so in love with movies and making movies and making the movies I want to make and watching movies. And I mean, I love movies so much. I'm first and foremost always thinking about just making a good movie, and it's only later when it starts screening and I do talks like this that I'm like, oh wow, this is really, we're talking a lot about religion, you know. But I love it, but it's only because, like, it's my life, and so yeah, I have no choice if I want to make personal, semi-autobiographical movies that's going to be set in that world because that's the world I came from. So it's exciting to talk about later, but it's in no way a strategic thing. I am aware of being alone in doing it. That's not why I do it.
Yeah, when I was watching this, because I don't have a natural affinity towards much of cinema aimed at teens and young adults, the whole God is not dead, all of those sorts of things. Like I just did like a spirituality movie search on IMDb. I'm running into things that I've never even heard of, like Amazing Love, the story of Hosea involving Sean Astin. Like I'm even Healed by Grace. Fireproof, Unconditional, a lot of these stories, a lot of redemption stories, and religion and faith and tradition comes in and it just wraps everybody in a big old hug, and we can move past the tragedy and we can have that transformation for characters in the movie. And
unless you don't fall in line with the belief in which your whole existence is a tragedy.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's that element that, I preached on it recently, and I loved that right at breakfast, the dad does it. They're all like, putting out the food. He's like, "Oh, we're blessed." And so I did like a whole #blessed sermon a few weeks ago. And that kind of #blessed mentality, that's how, that religion is something that can come in and it heals and it sets everything right, and that the Holy Spirit is not this trickster running around, right? There's all, it just comes in and fixes everything. And that means that I'm blessed because my life appears perfect on the outside, even though on the inside I'm having a very different and contrasting inner life. And that's what I like, that this really ran counter to that notion, to really make faith, spirituality, sexuality, try to go for the complexity, go for it being complex.
One of the things that I appreciated was that it felt to me at least that none of those folks were just biding time to leave their church behind. Like even Henry, like when he received the book about like being a Christian young man or something, he seemed genuinely touched by that book. Like I just appreciated that, like the sense that like everyone is struggling here, and sure there is hypocrisy and it's going to be revealed, and that's going to be a major challenge to some people, but they also love their church, and I'm assuming that they love Jesus, and it brought a ton of meaning into their life. I just appreciated the balance of that, I guess.
Thank you for saying that, because it's one of the most important things to me in the film, and I have to remind, that there's some kind of mixed reviews from a Christian perspective out there, and I'm grateful that they even exist, because most of the time they wouldn't have reviewed it at all, but that call out the movie a little bit for the like more slightly not satirical, but the more judgmental characters like Bonnie and people like that. And I always want to remind them that that's 3 or 4 characters out of 20, and almost the majority of almost the entire group are Bible believing Christians. It just means that they're not necessarily the ones talking about it all the time. But it is super important, I think, to keep in mind that the entire Gamble family ends the movie as Christians. It's not really a critique of the belief system. It's a critique of how we view others and treat others and progress and evolve.
Yeah, how we wield it.
Right.
How are we? Yeah. Is it healing? Is it love? Is it judgment? Is it how do you wield it?
So there's one character that stood out to me, and that's Ricky, obviously, because that's the most violent part of the movie. So it really stands out when he cuts himself with the
spoiler
shaver and all of that stuff. Sorry, we're a spoiler podcast. I hope that's okay. I think what really comes through for me is how honest it is, because you're right, Betsy. There's a lot of sort of quote-unquote Christian movies that are out there that would say, like, oh, well, you accept the love of Jesus and everything turns out okay. And here's this kid that is obviously, like, his life isn't okay. He's having to deal with a lot of stuff. And the helplessness that all of the people there have towards his situation and have no idea what to say to him, what would be helpful, what wouldn't be helpful. Like, he's like some kind of virus in the middle of them, and he just like it would just be better if he were just gone. Like, no love of Christ is going to reconcile any of the relationships between him and like the people at the party. And I think that to me felt really honest. Sometimes things aren't necessarily as neat and clean as you would think they would be. Like, sometimes we're not like these sort of Christian saviors that come in and show people how great we are, and everybody claps and thanks us. Like, sometimes things are a little strange, and it's that's part of life. Like, that's part of learning.
Part of what made me so sad about Ricky was that if our, Christian faith teaches us anything, it's that brokenness is part of the human condition and that we are reconciled in Christ, but we don't get to see what that looks like most of the time. But we're called to love people and, experience their brokenness alongside of them. And it made me sad that in their, even though their theology was, probably would have expressed something like that, in actuality, they couldn't hold him. Like, they couldn't bring his grief and his brokenness into their community. It was too scary.
Yeah, he's the reason. Really, he's kind of the reason for the movie. Is that the sort of the heart of the film a little bit, and maybe there would be hope for him if he hadn't had a homosexual incident. Maybe they would reach out to him more. But he's this depression combined with the fact that he's gay that sort of renders him immune from help and renders other people from feeling sympathy. And his dad had died, yeah. And he never left home, and nor had he been encouraged to explore the truth about himself or what he's into or what he likes, is attracted to. And that's another generational thing. I mean, he's about 10 years older than the kids, and if he were, so much of what these movies are trying to do a little bit is say, if this person had been born 10 years earlier, they would be screwed. And if this person had been born 10 years beyond or ahead, then they would be living in a more open and compassionate society. All those teenagers are going to have it better off than Ricky and the older people are. But I think to just kind of sum up the thing, I mean, the blandness of the youth minister and his wife that you were mentioning put up like right alongside Ricky in the bathroom is everything. That's the entire movie, is the disconnect between the sort of superficial we love Jesus glee that quote unquote traditional people feel, and you don't always know the damage that coding your judgment in that can cause.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes out of fear, right? Because I didn't grow up evangelical, but I did grow up in the South. But it was sort of traditional religion stuff, just like that youth leader kind of language, where like that stuff kind of becomes ingrained in you, and you know all of those cliches of like God won't give you more than you can handle, and like God has a plan for your life, and all of that stuff. Like that's so like part of that sort of culture growing up, to the point that you start to like convince yourself that all of those things are true. Just looking back on my upbringing, it's like none of those cliches panned out. Like I had to figure it out. Having someone that can have those honest conversations with our young people, I think that's helpful sort of moving forward. And that's that generational difference that I think you're talking about, Stephen. And it's a generational difference because we're less afraid, maybe.
It could be one of the very few positive qualities of mass media culture and communication, is that even kids in the most conservative homes can't help but be confronted with different types of people and points of view, and it, you know, even at its tackiest, it's still making its way into their psyches and potentially creating a curiosity or an empathy or something. So it's fun to travel to all these film festivals and stuff, but these movies in particular, I don't know if I'll always feel this way, but these movies in particular, I get really excited when we're finally available for the kid to watch in his room at 1 a.m., you know? Yeah. I mean, that's what I make them for, really. Yeah. The playing to 900 gay men in San Francisco is great, but I'm not really enlightening anyone. I make these as tools. Obviously, I make them just to be good movies that exist, but I do hope it can create a sense of understanding or...
Right, and I can totally see that for gay and straight kids and everywhere in between, that the greatest thing is for them to find this on Netflix one night.
Yeah, and a lot of them write me. These movies get pegged as LGBT films very early on, The Wise Kids more so than Henry Gamble, and so I end up doing 80% of the interviews. Again, this was more Wise Kids than Henry Gamble, but a little bit for Henry Gamble, maybe 50% for Henry Gamble with LGBT organizations, which is great. But again, it's talking to people that get it. It doesn't dig too deeply. A lot of those people are out of the world already. They're not dealing with it on a multi sort of level. So to be able to talk to Christians and people dealing with the spiritual side of the film is refreshing and important to me.
Oh, one of my favorite scenes is when Leo and the girls are on the hammocks, and one of them goes, "Yeah, it gets better," and they all crack up. Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I know.
Well, that's the only way that moment would have worked if, like 5 years from now, is if they laughed at it.
Yeah.
Is it in your skin? Is it in your bones? All your honor undertow. And there it goes, the middle row. There goes everything untold. For the love, for the long run, one by one, your favorite son. It was Arizona, the 17th, the hell knowing what's underneath. And I'm so sorry I couldn't speak so sweet.
Okay, so we've got some time for plugs. So I'll do guest first. So I'll let the hosts plug their stuff later. But Stephen, where can we find Henry Gamble? Where is this film showing at? You know, our local video store, our local Blockbuster. Where do we pick this up?
It might be.
And how can people get in touch with you and reach you online?
It's available widely on DVD and digital on demand. You can get it at Amazon, you can get it at iTunes, you can get it at Vudu, at Google Play. It's available at anywhere you buy movies, and will most likely later in the year be available on Netflix. So DVD on demand, it's pretty easily accessible. And then The Wise Kids is also available in all those places, and is also on DVD, and is on Netflix Instant as well. So you can watch Wise Kids streaming at Netflix and Hulu maybe too. So that's around.
Are you an active Twitter user?
Yeah. At Stephen D. Cohn. I'm a kind of a nerdy cinephile on Twitter, I have to admit. So I think a lot of people follow me and are like, what is he talking about? But, at Stephen D. Cohn at Twitter. I'm on Facebook. And then Henry Gamble has a Facebook page and also a website, henrygamblemovie.com.
Liz, where are you? What are you doing? How can people get in touch with you?
I am the canon to the ordinary for the Diocese of Nebraska, and I live in Omaha. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Liz East. And I'm going to plug our upcoming Diocese of Nebraska Western Residency, which maybe doesn't mean anything to you guys, but it means a lot to me when our whole diocesan staff goes on the road together for a week and we visit a different town every day and a different church every day, and it's really fun. So follow me along on Instagram in the coming weeks because you'll see some really pretty Western Nebraska shots. We're following what's called the Cowboy Trail. We call it the Cowboy Camino, and it's an old railroad track, which is no longer used by a railroad, but it crosses the state of Nebraska. So we're going to walk some of that and do some just some cool stuff along the way.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cowboy Camino.
Cowboy Camino.
Cowboy Camino. Do you get to ride a horse at any point?
No, I'll be
drive a herd.
I think I'll be driving
across the plain.
I'll be walking.
Claim land like in far and away, or
will I ford any rivers? No.
Will there be dysentery?
It's just like the Oregon Trail. I'll be walking, and I think I'll be driving our support vehicle.
Betsy, where are you? What are you doing? And how can people find you on the World Wide Web?
Oh, Greg, I'm about to be on summer vacation, baby.
Yay!
Graduation this Saturday, and we have our final faculty meeting tomorrow. So I emerge like out of a chrysalis into
Like the hungry caterpillar.
Yeah. This is when I sometimes return to Twitter, and I at Betsy_Gons, and return to actually being on Facebook. The Olympics are coming, friends, even though it may be Zika filled.
My name is Greg Knight. I am in Palm Beach. I am at Bethesda by the Sea Episcopal Church, where I'm the Director of Children and Youth Ministries. You can find us on the web at bbts.org. You can find me on Twitter at @ThatGregKnight.
You can find Popping Collars on the web, on Twitter at Popping Collars. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/poppingcollars. You can also find us on our website, poppingcollarspodcast.com, where you can find each and every one of our shows that we have recorded, going all the way back to the very beginning. You can also find us on any of your favorite podcasting apps, Stitcher, iTunes, SoundCloud. All we ask is that if you look for us in those places, please subscribe, rate, and review our show. That way we can move up in the rankings and finally crack that top 1,000. You can be the person that gets us over the hump and gets us to the top 1,000. All you have to do is just write a quick review. You guys are great. Bang, you're done. And you've gotten us to where we need to go. So please do that. Also, our show is featured on Episcopal Cafe each and every time. We love EpiscopalCafe.com. We know you will as well. Check them out for all your Episcopal news and beyond. With that, that's our show for this time. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Stephen, for coming on the show. We'll see you next time.
Keep those collars popped.